The sun hung low over the Nevada desert, casting long, rippling shadows across the military firing range. A dry wind carried the scent of hot metal and gunpowder as bursts of gunfire cracked in rhythmic succession, echoing off the barren hills. Elite operatives, muscular, stone-faced and deadly precise, took their positions, each one focused, mechanical in movement. This wasn't a show for the public. It was Navy SEAL training day, and mistakes here weren't just frowned upon. They were punished, usually with ridicule or worse. Tucked away at the edge of the spectator stands was a young girl, no older than 10, her legs swinging off the metal bench as she clutched a half-melted soda. She wasn't supposed to be there, not technically, but she had begged to come, and her father, Chief Warrant Officer James Teller, had relented, bringing her along with a promise that she would stay silent, respectful, and above all, out of the way. Her name was Lily. She wore a faded hoodie, several sizes too big, and a ball cap that barely kept her curls from her eyes. She said nothing, but her eyes moved with absolute intensity. She wasn't distracted by the sand or the heat. She wasn't looking at her phone, like other kids might have. She was watching, closely. Colonel Rick Hawthorne noticed her before he even registered who she belonged to. It was unusual, after all, to have any civilian that young near a military range, let alone one clearly so enthralled. He tapped James on the shoulder, brow furrowed. "That your kid?" James nodded, unsure if this was about to get him a stern talking to. "She doesn't blink much, does she?" the colonel muttered, half to himself. "I've told her not to stare. She zones in." "Has since she was 5, James replied. "Used to watch me clean my rifle for hours, like it was a bedtime story." Colonel Hawthorne smirked, then looked away. "Strange little thing," he said, already forgetting the moment, until later. As the SEALs rotated through a live-fire exercise, Lily's fascination only deepened. She tracked every soldier, every breath between shots, the subtle angle of their stances, the timing of their reloads. To anyone else, it might have seemed like childish wonder. But to someone watching closely, like Hawthorne now was, it looked different, studied, intentional. She leaned forward every time a shooter prepared. Her fingers twitched ever so slightly, as if mimicking their trigger pulls. Hawthorne watched as she seemed to anticipate each shot milliseconds before it rang out. It was unnerving, even impressive, but still, she was just a kid, probably a quirky one at that. Near the end of the session, one of the trainees misfired, jerking the shot too hard, the round landing far off target. A low grunt of disapproval came from the colonel. "That was a terrible pull," Lily said quietly, not realizing how loud her voice had become. Every head within 10 feet turned toward her. The soldier who'd fired looked stung. James snapped his head in her direction. "Lily!" he hissed. "Quiet!" But Hawthorne held up a hand. His curiosity had shifted into something else now. "What did you say?" She gulped, her eyes wide. "The shot was off. He yanked the trigger instead of squeezing." The colonel raised an eyebrow. "You shoot?" She hesitated. "No, I mean, not really. Just BB guns, in the backyard. And you spotted that just by watching?" She nodded, shrinking back into her hoodie like a turtle. The colonel stared at her for a long beat, then turned to James. "Your kid's got guts. Not every day someone calls out a SEAL on his grip." James winced. "Apologies, sir. I'll make sure—" "No," Hawthorne interrupted, his gaze still on Lily. "Let's do something different. Give her a turn on the line." Lily's head snapped up, her mouth fell open. "Sir?" James blinked. "You can't be serious. It's just a static target. Let her hold a rifle. See what all that watching's really worth. You worried she'll embarrass us?" "She's 10, and clearly sharper than half the rookies out here," Hawthorne said. "Let's see if she can back it up." Lily looked to her dad. Her eyes weren't pleading. They were calm, ready. James hesitated. He knew his daughter. She didn't make bold claims. She didn't cry when she fell or demand to be seen. But she didn't ask for things like this either. Not unless she really believed she could do it. "You sure?" he whispered. She nodded once. That was all the colonel needed. "Get her a setup," Hawthorne said, walking off. "Let's see if the observer has more than just eyes." What began as a casual afternoon at the range had just shifted into something else. No one there knew it yet, but history was about to start writing itself. The crowd around the range had thinned. Some soldiers began stowing their gear, others joking quietly near the ammo crates. But in the center of it all, Lily stood motionless on the shooting line, small hands resting at her sides as the full-sized rifle lay on the table before her. She didn't look afraid. She didn't even look nervous. She looked focused. Colonel Hawthorne stood to her left, arms crossed over his chest, eyes studying every twitch, every breath. To her right, her father, James, adjusted the ear protection on her head, his expression caught somewhere between pride and dread. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I want to," she replied, her voice level. "I've been ready for a long time." James said nothing more. He simply stepped back. The rifle was a standard M4 carbine, too large for her frame, but propped on a bipod to minimize recoil. One of the instructors had adjusted it low enough for her to sight through comfortably. Even with the modifications, she looked out of place behind it, like someone had dropped a child into the cockpit of a fighter jet. A few of the soldiers chuckled under their breath. "What's this? Take your daughter to work day." Another snorted. "Watch her cry after the first shot." Hawthorne didn't tell them to stop. He wanted the pressure to stay. It was part of the test. "All right," he said, stepping forward. 5 targets, 50 yards. You get 5 rounds. If you hit even one, I'll be impressed." Lily didn't reply. She simply leaned forward, her cheek pressing against the stock like she'd done it 100 times. Her fingers moved with precision, checking the safety, aligning the sight, adjusting her breathing. Hawthorne's amusement slowly gave way to genuine interest. The first shot rang out. Ping, direct hit, dead center. A silence fell across the range. Second shot, ping, another bullseye. By the third, no one was laughing. By the fourth, people were approaching the range again, pulling out phones, nudging each other in disbelief. Ping, 4 for 4. Then came the final shot. This time she waited. She adjusted slightly. Her breathing slowed to near stillness. For 10 seconds, she didn't move a muscle. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ping, 5 for 5. Colonel Hawthorne stared at the target board through his binoculars. All 5 rounds had landed in a grouping no larger than a golf ball. Perfect precision. No recoil flinch. No hesitation. He turned to the instructor beside him. "You sure she's never done this before?" "Not once. This is her first time on a live weapon." The colonel stepped forward. "What's your name, kid?" "Lily Teller," she said, stepping back from the weapon. "You just embarrassed half my team." "I didn't mean to," she said quickly. "I just wanted a turn." "Wanted a turn," he repeated, shaking his head. "And here I was, expecting to clean up a tantrum." The instructor checked the targets again. "Sir, I've seen snipers miss at this range under pressure." Hawthorne turned back to Lily. "Do you know what you just did?" "I followed the rhythm," she said. "What rhythm?" "The breathing," she explained. "The trigger squeeze. I've seen it enough times. I just matched the pattern. I can almost hear it when I close my eyes." James stepped beside her now, speechless. This wasn't just talent. It was something else, something he hadn't realized had been forming for years, while she silently sat beside him during weapons maintenance or watched training videos over his shoulder. Hawthorne scratched his jaw, visibly recalibrating his judgment. "How'd you learn to see that?" "I don't know," she said. I just always notice things, where the bullet lands, why it lands there, what went wrong. It's like watching a dance." The colonel smirked. "Well, that dance just made every man here rethink his career path." One of the younger soldiers, the same one she'd corrected earlier, approached with an uneasy laugh. "You got lucky, right?" Lily looked at him. "Do you want me to shoot again?" He raised his hands. No, we're good." Hawthorne was no longer amused. He was intrigued. This wasn't a one-off. He'd seen enough miracle shots to know the difference between fluke and instinct. What she'd shown was the latter, and it was raw, unshaped, and dangerous in the best possible way. He glanced at James. "You've got something here. She's not just talented. She's seeing the language of the shot. That doesn't happen by accident." "I don't know what to say," James muttered. "Say you'll let her come back." Lily's eyes widened. You mean it? I don't hand out compliments, the colonel said, but I also don't ignore what's right in front of me. If you're serious, we're going to give you a real test next time, not just paper targets. She nodded, barely containing the excitement behind her calm expression. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lily Teller walked off the range, no longer the quiet girl on the sidelines. She had made her request, stood in the fire of doubt, and come out sharper than steel. And unknown to her, this was just the beginning. The following week, the desert air was hotter, drier, and somehow more electric. Word had spread like a wildfire through the ranks about the 10-year-old girl who had stepped onto the range and obliterated expectations. The story had already twisted into legend. Some said she shot blindfolded, others that she had trained with retired assassins. What none of them could deny was this: Lily Teller had hit 5 targets dead center under pressure, and no one had seen it coming. Colonel Hawthorne was not a man prone to superstition, but he believed in patterns. He believed in anomalies, and Lily had proven herself to be both. Today's setup was different. There were no laughs, no condescension. The soldiers weren't talking at all. They were watching, waiting. Half of them didn't know whether to feel threatened or impressed. But the colonel had raised the stakes, and everyone knew it. Hawthorne stood near a covered crate, arms folded, eyes locked on Lily as she approached. This time, she wasn't just the girl with the oversized hoodie. She wore a fitted vest, tactical gloves, and a quiet seriousness that matched any of the elite shooters around her. Her dad walked beside her, silent but proud. "Glad you came back," Hawthorne said, his voice low but steady. "I said I would," she replied simply. "Today's different. We're not doing paper targets. We're going mobile, timed, reactive, simulated threat environments. It's a test most adults fail." Lily nodded. "You understand what you're doing?" "Yes." "You scared?" She thought about that for a moment. "Not of shooting, but I'm scared I might not be taken seriously if I do well again." That response struck deeper than Hawthorne expected. He exhaled through his nose, then lifted the crate lid. Inside was a compact training rifle, lightweight, modified, ideal for her size, but with no compromise in accuracy or complexity. "You're not here to prove yourself to anyone," he said. "You're here to speak in a language most people never learn. Let your skill talk." The first drill was brutal, even for trained operatives. 5 pop-up targets scattered across uneven terrain. Some moved, some didn't. The shooter had to identify hostile silhouettes among neutral ones, firing only at confirmed threats. Time was tracked. Accuracy was everything. Lily was given 1 run, 1 shot per target. No second chances. She stepped onto the platform, a single breath in, then silence. The buzzer blared. She dropped into a crouch instinctively, her small frame gliding low and fast across the course. The first target popped up, civilian outline. No fire. The second, enemy. She didn't hesitate. Crack. A single shot, clean and sharp. The target dropped instantly. 3 more rows in staggered intervals. She moved like water, each movement smooth, each decision deliberate. No wasted motion, no wasted rounds. By the time she crossed the finish line, the stopwatch read 14.7 seconds. The record, 17.2 for a full-grown Navy SEAL. She didn't just pass the course, she crushed it. No one clapped, no one spoke. The silence that followed was heavier than any cheer. Hawthorne stepped onto the course, staring at the targets. Every shot had landed perfectly, center mass, no grazes, no misreads. She had identified every threat, ignored every decoy, and moved with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times. But she hadn't. "Who taught you this?" he asked, not with doubt, but wonder. "No one taught me," she said. "I just watch everything. I memorize it, and then I try to move the same way, only smaller." It was then that one of the soldiers finally spoke. "Sir, I've never seen anything like that, not even in final phase Bud S." Hawthorne nodded slowly. "She's not just mimicking, she's predicting." There was another pause. Then, at once, the silence broke, not with laughter or disbelief, but with something rarer, respect. a slow nod from the team leader, a whispered "damn" from the corner. And finally, one by one, the soldiers started stepping forward, not to challenge her, but to shake her hand. For Lily, it was surreal. Just a week ago, she had been the strange girl watching from the bleachers, called out for speaking her mind. Now, the same men who had rolled their eyes at her were standing straighter in her presence. Her father, standing off to the side, simply watched her with quiet awe. This wasn't about hitting targets anymore. It was about breaking barriers, age, gender, assumption. She hadn't just fired shots, she'd fired through walls. As she stood beside the colonel, she asked the only question that mattered to her in that moment. "What's the next test?" Hawthorne looked at her, then glanced at the stunned crowd behind her. "There's one more," he said. "The kind no one outside of SEAL training even knows exists. It's brutal, it's intense, and it's real-time combat simulation. I want to try it." He smiled just slightly. "I thought you'd say that." Zoom. And so, the silence was shattered, not by noise, but by something far more lasting, recognition, and the quiet, seismic shift of a young girl turning potential into undeniable power. The desert wind was cruel that morning, fast, dry, biting. It whipped against the training compound like a challenge in motion, setting the tone for what was to come. Today wasn't just another drill. It wasn't a practice course or a test for fun. It was the one simulation that even seasoned recruits whispered about with unease. And now it was being prepared for Lily Teller. Colonel Hawthorne stood beside a reinforced hangar, arms folded as he briefed the small group of instructors nearby. "This isn't about showing off anymore. It's about limits. We're not here to coddle her. She wants to try the SEAL CQB gauntlet. We give her the real thing." One instructor raised an eyebrow. "With respect, sir, that test's designed to push grown men to their edge. She's 10. Hawthorne didn't flinch. "That 10-year-old just cut through our top scenario like she was walking to the fridge. You think she's not ready? You don't know her like I do." Inside the warehouse, the setup was brutal by design. A close-quarters combat course built for maximum disorientation. Flashing strobe lights, timed target pops, enemy versus civilian recognition, audio distractions, tight corners, and simulated gunfire. Everything about it was designed to induce panic, confusion, and failure. Most grown men took multiple tries just to finish. Many didn't. The name of the course was unofficial, but fitting: The Maze of Judgment. Lily entered the prep area in silence, her face pale but determined. Her father stood behind her, unsure whether to intervene or stand aside. He chose the latter, not because he was indifferent, but because he trusted her. And more than that, because she had earned the right to walk her own path. "You sure about this?" the colonel asked as she strapped on a lightweight Kevlar vest and adjusted her goggles. "I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't," she said, voice steady. "This is the real deal. No coaching, no do-overs. You move fast, think faster, and shoot clean. One civilian hit and the run's invalid. One hesitation and it's over." "I understand," he nodded, then quietly handed her a training pistol fitted with laser rounds. No real bullets, but accurate enough to test reflexes with brutal honesty. "Then God help us all if you're this good now." She stepped into the maze. The steel door slammed behind her. Immediately the lights cut. Red strobes pulsed in bursts. Sirens screamed overhead. A recorded scream echoed from the far end of the hall. Then came the targets, one at a time, some armed, some not. Lily didn't flinch. She flowed forward, low to the ground, checking every corner. Her eyes flicked back and forth, but her hands stayed steady. The first target popped. Armed assailant. She fired once, hit. Light blinked red, correct. Then another. Civilian. No shot. She moved faster. By the fourth chamber, the pressure was mounting. Smoke hissed from the floor vents. The room narrowed. Multiple silhouettes dropped from the ceiling. 2 combatants, 1 civilian. Most trainees failed here. The trick was to recognize not just the weapons, but the body language. Real threats looked different from cardboard cutouts. Lily paused for half a heartbeat, then fired twice. Red lights. She kept going. The instructors watched from a control booth, jaws slack. "She's tracking movement patterns," one whispered. "She's predicting where targets are before they appear." "She's mapping the whole course in her head," another added, "like a freaking chess computer." By the final chamber, Lily's breathing was heavier but still measured. Her face was streaked with sweat, but her aim hadn't drifted once. 4 last targets stood before her. 2 enemies, 1 hostage, 1 decoy. A sudden burst of white light blinded the room for 2 seconds, a test of instinct. Then, total darkness. Everyone on the monitor leaned in. Crack. 1 shot. Pause. Crack. Crack. The red lights lit up. All correct. She walked out of the maze without a word. Hawthorne met her at the exit. "How do you feel?" She pulled off the goggles. "Tired," she admitted, "but clear." "You didn't miss a single target," he said. "No civilian hits. Fastest run time in the history of the program, 12 minutes and 9 seconds. The adult record was 12:40. Her eyes widened just slightly. "You just did the impossible," he added, "and made it look routine." There was silence. Not from disbelief, but reverence. Then someone in the observation booth started clapping. Another joined, then more. And soon the entire training team, instructors, soldiers, even skeptics, all stood to applaud a little girl who had faced down a nightmare scenario and walked through it with quiet brilliance. No one dared to laugh now. The test they had guarded like a sacred ritual had just been conquered by someone who wasn't supposed to belong. And with every second, Lily's myth grew into legacy. Hawthorne knelt beside her. "You just crossed the threshold, kid. You're no longer a novelty. You're a threat, and the world is going to have to deal with that." She looked up at him, and for the first time a tiny smile appeared. "I think I'm just getting started." 2 days after Lily completed the Maze of Judgment, the base was no longer just a military installation. It had become a quiet hub of whispered stories, growing louder with every repetition. The colonel's staff had tried to contain the narrative, to keep it in-house. But stories like this never stay hidden, not when they brush up against the unbelievable. And Lily Teller wasn't just passing tests anymore, she was rewriting them. It started with a clipboard. One of the senior trainers had been reviewing her gauntlet performance when he decided, almost playfully, to cross-reference her timing, accuracy, and decision-making with the SEAL's archived testing records. What he found stopped him cold. Not only had she beaten the fastest SEAL timing on record for that particular course, she had done it with a perfect civilian save rate and the smallest margin of error in recorded history. He didn't speak. He just printed the sheet and walked it down to Colonel Hawthorne's office. Hawthorne, seated at his desk, gave it one glance, then reread it twice. "That can't be right," he muttered. "I thought the same thing, sir." He ran his fingers over the numbers. The data didn't lie. She hadn't just passed the test. She had set new standards, standards that no adult operator had ever reached. Not in speed, not in calmness, and certainly not at her age. That same day, the file was quietly sent to the Pentagon, and within 24 hours, the world came knocking. News agencies weren't allowed near the range, but that didn't stop the leaks. A few lines of the story made it onto a defense blog. Then a clip of her original shooting test was leaked, probably by someone inside the base. It went viral in under 6 hours. Within a day, Lily Teller was trending worldwide. 10-year-old girl outscores Navy SEALs on advanced firing test. Is this child a military prodigy or something more? The girl who shot through every limit. Cable networks wanted interviews. Defense analysts speculated publicly about her neural processing speed. Some claimed she was a rare savant. Others called her a weapon in human form. But the truth, as Hawthorne knew, was much simpler. She had trained herself quietly by watching, analyzing, absorbing, and when given the chance, she had performed with more grace and control than men who'd spent a decade in service. And now, she was a name. At the base, things changed fast. Where once she'd been the curious girl at the edge of the bleachers, now grown soldiers stopped to greet her with respect. Instructors she'd never met before offered their hands, their time, their knowledge. She had become a student and a teacher in the same breath. She spent the mornings with Colonel Hawthorne now. He had carved out space in his office, cluttered with dusty medals and outdated maps, and cleared the walls to mount up charts of her scores. They worked together, not with drills but with puzzles. She wanted to understand the why behind every weapon's kickback, every trigger's pressure threshold, every reactionary delay between eye and nerve. The Colonel provided the data. She provided the questions. "What if you designed a weapon backwards?" she asked one day. "What do you mean?" "I mean, instead of building a gun and training people to use it, what if you studied how people actually move under stress and built the weapon to match them?" He had no answer, but her idea stuck. Soon after, they ran her through diagnostics, eye tracking, reflex monitoring, decision tree branching. The data came back staggering. She didn't just see faster, she processed differently. Where others scanned a situation in pieces, Lily saw it all at once, like a landscape in motion. It wasn't mystical, it wasn't magic. It was simply how her mind had developed from watching so long, so closely. Then came the Navy. A group of high-ranking officers flew in under the radar. They asked to see her shoot. Hawthorne agreed, but under one condition. She wouldn't be a show pony. She'd be evaluated like any other operator. She ran 3 drills, hit every target, passed every parameter. The officers watched in stunned silence. One, a veteran SEAL commander, turned to Hawthorne afterward and muttered, "We've trained killers for years, but I don't think we've ever trained instinct." They offered her a sponsorship into a new program, a classified experimental track for youth prodigies with tactical aptitude. It came with government oversight, heavy security, and full clearance, but it also came with pressure, with exposure, with sacrifice. James Teller, her father, stepped in. "Not yet," he said. "She's still a kid." Hawthorne didn't disagree. That night, Lily sat quietly on the edge of her bunk in the guest quarters at the base. Her father sat across from her, the silence long and full. "Do you want this?" he asked finally. She looked up. "I want to learn, but I don't want to become something I can't undo." His heart ached at her clarity. "You broke records, Lil. Ones grown men couldn't touch." "I didn't mean to break them," she said. "I just wanted to be taken seriously." And she had been, more seriously than anyone could have imagined. But the road forward was no longer about curiosity. It was about legacy, and that, they both knew, would change everything. In the months that followed, the name Lily Teller was no longer spoken with surprise. It was spoken with reverence. What began as a child's quiet presence at a firing range had evolved into something larger than anyone had imagined. Her story, first dismissed as an internet anomaly, now shaped serious internal discussions at the Pentagon, at West Point, and even within private intelligence circles. But for Lily, the noise outside mattered little. She was still the same girl, calm, quiet, and more curious than ever. The military, to its credit, had been cautious. They didn't parade her around for public relations or push her into dangerous programs. Instead, under Colonel Hawthorne's guidance, they created something new, the Observer Initiative, a pilot program not for training children to be soldiers, but to understand how natural cognitive talent could help redesign future training models for elite forces. Lily was at the center of it. Each week, she met with instructors not as a student, but as a peer. She analyzed recordings of real SEAL missions, not to criticize, but to offer her read of the split-second decisions, often identifying errors no one else had noticed. Her talent wasn't just in pulling a trigger, it was in seeing the flow of chaos and knowing where it would break next. Still, it wasn't always easy. Some in the ranks resented her presence. They didn't say it outright, but Lily could sense the distance in their eyes, the unspoken challenge of tradition meeting transformation. One day, a senior drill instructor confronted Colonel Hawthorne in private. "We're teaching killers how to survive war zones, and you've got a 10-year-old drawing diagrams in our mission briefings. She's smart, sure, but what happens when she gets it wrong?" Hawthorne leaned in. Then she learns, like the rest of us. But until then, maybe we should ask why a 10-year-old sees what we've missed for years. The real shift didn't come from her shooting, or even from the records she broke. It came from the culture she changed. One by one, the men who had once laughed at her, mocked her, doubted her, began showing up to her sessions, not because they were ordered to, but because they had questions. How had she spotted the sniper's misalignment on the infrared scan? How did she know that the hostage's shadow meant the assailant had moved behind the pillar? How did she do it without panic? She never bragged, never acted like she knew more. She just explained softly what she saw, and suddenly, for the first time in years, elite operators began to listen to someone other than their commanders. It was James Teller, her father, who noticed the biggest change. His daughter still loved puzzles and math, still curled up with books at night, still asked for dessert before dinner. But now, she walked with a different weight, not a burden, but a purpose. She knew what she could do, and she had chosen to use it not for ego, not for power, but for understanding. On the 1-year anniversary of her first shot on that range, the base hosted a quiet ceremony. No reporters, no cameras, just soldiers, instructors, and a few visiting officials. Colonel Hawthorne stepped up to the microphone, looking unusually solemn. "I've been in the military 28 years, he began. "I've seen men pass through this place who could run farther, shoot faster, survive longer than anyone else alive. But what I saw in this past year wasn't about muscle, it wasn't about age, it was about sight, about instinct, about what happens when someone comes along and reminds us that greatness doesn't always walk in boots. It sometimes walks in sneakers, with a notebook and a head full of questions." He turned to Lily, who sat beside her father, legs dangling off the bench like she always used to. "Lily Teller didn't just beat our records, she broke our assumptions. And that is a legacy none of us will forget." The men and women in uniform stood, not with forced applause, but with genuine respect. Later that evening, as the sun slipped below the Nevada ridgeline, Lily stood alone at the range. She held no weapon, just her notebook, sketching out a new kind of firing algorithm she'd been thinking about, something intuitive, something organic. Her mind never stopped. James approached, hands in his pockets. "You okay?" She smiled. "Yeah, I'm just thinking, maybe I'll teach this stuff one day, help people shoot smarter, not just harder." He nodded. "That sounds like you." She looked out at the empty field, where a year ago she had stood alone, laughed at, overlooked. Now that same spot was marked, literally, with a small brass plate embedded in the ground. On this line, "Legacy began." She read it quietly, then turned to her dad. "I think I want to go home for a while." He smiled. "I think that's the smartest shot you've called yet." And just like that, the girl who had once been mocked for even asking to touch a rifle left behind a place she had changed forever, not with force, but with clarity, confidence, and quiet fire. Her name was Lily Teller, and they'd never forget her again. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you rethink what true strength looks like, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. We bring you real, unforgettable stories every week, stories that prove courage, talent, and legacy can come from the most unexpected places. Hit the bell so you never miss what's next, because sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes.